Okay, so in this video we're going to actually configure now the Duo SSO with Active Directory acting as our on-premise authentication source or identity provider. So the first thing we want to do, as mentioned in the configuration steps, is make sure that we prepare our environment for the installation of the authentication proxy. Now the authentication proxy will communicate within your environment between the Active Directory server and between Duo in the cloud. So we need to make sure that we have the right communication in place, and we'll run through all those requirements as we kind of get to those parts as well. Now, as mentioned, we can install the authentication proxy on a Windows machine, or we can install it on a Linux machine. In this demonstration, we're going to install it on a Windows machine. So the first thing we want to do is access the Duo admin panel. And then once you're logged in, I'm using a demo account here. What we want to do is we want to head over now to single sign-on. And depending on what stage you're at in terms of actually using Duo and configuring single sign-on, this page might look slightly different, but hopefully it looks the same. So we're essentially presented with two options now here with the Duo single sign-on feature. So we can use the on-premise Active Directory. This is the one that we're going to be using today. Or we can also use other SAML identity providers such as Azure Active Directory, and there's other options available as well. As I said, we're sticking with Active Directory today, so we will select this option. But before we do, you can see here that it's telling us that we'll need the Duo Authentication Proxy here, and we'll also need the service account credentials, etc. Everything that I've pretty much mentioned already in the previous videos. So before we click Add an Active Directory, I want you to click View Documentation, because this is essentially the documentation we will use to actually run through the configuration, or to make sure that everything is configured correctly. And the Duo documentation is pretty good, pretty up to date, so you can actually follow through in terms of prerequisites, what you need in place. So you can see a list of prerequisites, some that I've pretty much called out already, and then you actually run through the steps here. And as I said, depending on what stage or how far you've gone with using Duo, the single sign-on page will look slightly different. As you can see here in this particular step 3, you need to create a customizable single sign-on domain. Now, you can only do that as a paying customer. If you're not a paid customer, or you're just trialing Duo, you cannot create a subdomain as well, and it actually says it here as well. So depending on what sort of licensing you're using at the moment, you may or may not be able to do this as well. But you can see the documentation, it guides you through each of the steps. Very, very useful. So it's always worth having that open as well. So what we're going to do is we'll head back over to the Duo admin panel, and we'll go to Add an Active Directory. Okay, so when we get here, we can see we've got Active Directory configuration, and there's quite a lot of different things that we now need to take into consideration. Step 1, we can see that the authentication proxy is not connected to Duo, meaning it's not configured at least to communicate with Duo at this moment in time, and that's because we're just running through the configuration, or starting to run through the configuration. So we got step 1, installation of the authentication proxy, then we configure Active Directory, and then we configure our permitted email domains, so our domains that we have permission to use, and that's where we'll actually verify with a TXT record. You can see I've already got one in here that's already verified from a previous configuration, so we'll look at maybe changing that and having a look at that, so you can see how that is done. And then lastly, we'll test the Active Directory configuration to make sure that all is in place. So we'll start off with step 1. So we need to add the authentication proxy. You can see here we have a bunch of configurations, steps that we need to go through to enable this and make sure that it's up and running. So what we need to do is, first and foremost, we need to download the installer. So we can see that starts to download for Windows default. So it's going to configure or download, the latest authentication proxy. You do have the option for Linux as well. We'll stick with Windows, and now we can see that that's downloaded here. So I'm not installing it on this particular machine. We're going to use a demo machine. So I'll take this image and I will put it on a demo machine. But before we do that, just a quick word from our sponsors. In the past year, 1 in 4 companies have reported an IT security incident. And of those reported incidents, 71% of the attacks were via email. And how do I know this? Hornet Security. Hornet Security are a leading cloud email security provider, and their latest report focused on security incidents shows some interesting statistics. But what's more surprising is that the report by Hornet Security showed that the more security features businesses use to protect their Microsoft 365 environment, the more likely it was that they would be subject to security incidents. In fact, this was true for over 80% of the respondents that took part. This is just a snippet of the report that Hornet Security has recently released, and it has a wealth of useful information that can help you refocus your security efforts, allowing you to better protect your environment. If you're interested in reading the detailed report, then I would urge you to head over to hornetsecurity.com, where you can access the report for free. And if you happen to have Microsoft 365 and would like to understand how to better protect your tenant, you're actually in luck, because Hornet Security are actually hosting a free webinar on 6 must-have Microsoft 365 security configurations that every admin needs to know. So don't delay, head over to hornetsecurity.com today. Alright, so this is my demo machine where we're actually going to install the Duo Authentication Proxy. You can see that I have the latest version at the time of doing this video ready, so we'll just proceed now with this installation. Pretty straightforward, very lightweight application to get up and running. So I'll just run through the steps. Proxy manager and proxy service. So the manager is essentially it just gives you a graphical user interface. Essentially, it's for you to be able to better control the Duo Authentication Proxy. As you can see there, it's not required for this installation, but it is selected by default. So we'll just leave that on because it visually makes things a little bit easier. And then we'll just proceed with the installation. Once that's completed, just click next and finish, and we will open the authentication proxy configuration file. And as you can see, this is the local proxy manager that is loading here. So I'll just make that a little bit bigger, and you can see this is the default. So you've got the auth proxy CFG file, essentially just output in this graphical user interface. And then you have on the right hand side, you've got the output as well. So what we need to do now is we need to populate this configuration file. We can see with the authentication proxy as well that it's currently stopped. We can see the version that it's using, and we have with the graphical user interface here, we can easily start and stop the service. We can validate the configuration before we save it, and again, once we validate and save, that's going to then allow us to restart the service so that those changes can essentially take effect. So what we need to do now is, if we just minimize this and we go back to our admin panel, we can see that we have some configuration here that we can add to the authentication proxy. So here it says add the SSO section and service account credentials to the file. Append the following at the end of the file to add your service account username and password. These credentials will never leave your network. So what we need to do is we need to copy these. So let's just go to copy, and then we'll put these into our authentication proxy configuration. So if we just go back to this, what we'll do here is let's remove these elements here. Let's just paste it in there for now. And what you can see here, we've got the key that's required, the remote identity key that's required for the SSO authentication. And then what we need to do here is we need to uncomment the service account username and also the service account password as well, because we will let me just put that in, because we'll need that to authenticate. So we'll add my username and password now. So for the service account username and password, ensure that the actual account itself has the permissions to be able to read and write on Active Directory. So we've just got a demo account that I'm going to use here called service account as the username, and then I have the very insecure password for this demo account. Now, if you are looking at a way to encrypt the usernames and passwords that are inserted within the authentication proxy, that can be done with a command or commands, depending on how you want to do it, to encrypt each of these passwords. So you can either encrypt all passwords at once by running a command, or you can encrypt a single password if you don't want to encrypt everything. So what we'll do, just for the purpose of this demo, we will just run a command which is going to encrypt everything. So we need to run this with administrator privileges on the command prompt, and then we enter a command which you can find on the Duo website. So if I just put this in Notepad so that you can see it first and foremost. Okay, so this is the command that we need to run in its entirety. So I'll just copy this here, and then we can put this into the administrator prompt there. And here you see, it's basically saying it's going to encrypt all passwords and secrets in your configuration file, overwriting the plain text values in place. Would you like to continue? So we'll just press yes, or type yes. And then we can see that encryption has been complete. The authentication proxy configuration file has been updated. So there's nothing for you to manually update before running this command. It should do it itself, or rather will do it itself. So now if we let's just exit out of this, let's just save it, exit out of this, and then let's just start the manager again. Alright, it's not showing there. Okay, so one thing to note here is when you're running the authentication proxy manager, is that when you issue or when you want to encrypt all the passwords, it seems as though you have to close the proxy manager before you actually run the command, because I've just done that, as you've just seen, and it basically returned the same output. But after closing the proxy manager and running the command again, it's with the authentication proxy closed, it's as you can see here, it's encrypted the the password here, and you can see what it's done is you can see it also says protected now, and then you've got this long string. So that's good. That all works now. So that's if you want to ensure that your passwords are private on your authentication proxy and not shown. So we've done we've pretty much filled out what's required of the template. So we've got the service account username, we've got the service account password. Now what we need to do is we need to tie this into Active Directory, or kind of form that communication with Active Directory. So in order to do that, we need to specify the Active Directory server as a host. We also need to specify the service account username and password again, and also the search DN for that as well. So we'll configure our Active Directory server IP address now in the Duo Authentication Proxy. So in my demonstration, I am using the following IP address. And again, we're just going to use the same service account username and again the same password, and then what we'll do is we'll just encrypt that again, and we'll also specify the search DN, and we'll keep this eye level for the actual domain as well. So in my case, this is going to be DC equals demo, DC equals network WizKid, and then it's going to be DC equals com. Yeah, so that looks about right. So once your service account, password and search DN has been entered, as well as the host, we can then go ahead and save that. And again, if you wanted to encrypt that again, then you could run the same command. So again, what we'll do is we'll just demonstrate that. So I'll just close this, and then I'll just up arrow on that, and then we'll say yes, and that says that it's done. So then we'll open the proxy manager again, and there you go. So you can see that the password now is protected as well. So again, everything looks good there. You could technically copy the secret because it's the same password from there, but again, I just wanted to show you how we could just run the same command again to do that, where configuration or passwords are slightly different in your case. So that's done. So let's just validate the configuration there, and you can see we've got one error because there's still one thing that we've not completed, and that's our next step. And then you've obviously got errors around the remaining configuration in here that we don't need to do as part of this this section. So the one that we're focused on is so we can see here that there's no problems with the configuration that we've entered for the AD client, which is good, but we can see under the SSO section that there's a configuration problem. The authentication proxy update SSO enrollment code script does not appear to have been run, and that's right, we've not run that yet, so we do need to run that. And where do we get that from? Well, we can get that from the admin panel. So if we just return there, our second part, so we've kind of completed this section here, as well as the additional section for actually forming that connection, if you like, with the Active Directory server. Now what we want to do is we want to connect the authentication proxy to Duo, and this is the script that they're talking about that we need to run. So we'll just copy that, and then let's go back to our server there, and then under the administrator, let's just enter that, and we'll give that a minute there to run through what it needs to do. We can see service is started, service could not be started, and I believe that might be because of the following config here. So let's just comment these out for now. Okay, and we'll save that again. And what we could do as well, just to validate that that has actually made a difference, is just click validate, and let's just see what we get in the output this time. So we can see there that radio server auto. Let's just comment that out as well, actually. So we'll continue with that one, and then we'll validate it again. Now that I've commented that out, and you can see there that we've got no issues now detected. So let's just run that script again, and let's see if we can get this to start. So now we can see that it is starting. We're not getting that error that we got last time, and that's because before what it wanted was we had these parameters that were essentially not blanked out, so it wanted us to fill in the configuration for that. But as I say, because we don't need that yet, we can just blank that. We can blank that out. And then once that's done, we can see that the authentication proxy service has started successfully. So again, if I just show you here, we can see now that the authentication proxy is running. We can see the uptime. We can see the current version that we're using, and we can see that the validation has passed. So we're all good there. So let's return back now to the Duo admin panel, and let's move to step 3, where we actually verify that the proxy is indeed connected. So let's just run that test, and we can see here that the not connected. So we need to understand why that's not connected, or why it's showing as not connected. So to do that, we just run back to the authentication proxy, and we can also look at the logs in the authentication proxy. So if we go to the program files and logs, you can actually look at the activity from the authentication proxy. So what we can see here, we seem to be getting an error, which is around about the time now that we're looking at, and we can see that we have an error here saying unable to connect to Duo single sign-on. Please generate a new enrollment command from the authentication proxy page in the Duo admin panel, and then try again. Okay, so for whatever reason, we shall do that again. Let's just disconnect this here. Let's just attempt to do this again. So we'll just run this command here. All secrets stored successfully. Okay, that says it started again. So let's attempt to try again. And there we go. So now we can see. So I think what it wanted was us to kind of regenerate this this script here, which is totally fine. Once we did that and we entered that the command into the Duo into the system where the Duo authentication proxy is installed, we can see that after we've run the test that everything is connected. That's essentially all the authentication proxy setup configured, and now what we would do is we would return back to the configuration for single sign-on and move on to configuring the remaining sections of this. So we can see now that in section 1 we have the authentication proxy configured now. We can see the version and we can see that it's connected. You can add additional authentication proxies if you choose to, and if you have those in your environment. For this demonstration, we will stick with the one. And then we can also give our Active Directory a name. If we've got multiple, we can specify different names here. So for our domain controller, we'll just enter the IP address that we're going to be using. So that's the same one that we put into the authentication proxy. So in my case, it's going to be 151.7.199. And then we're just going to be using 389. And then base DM, we're going to use the same thing that we did before. So DC equals demo, DC equals network wizkid, DC equals com. Okay, so that's my domain there. And unless you've got a specific setup in your environment, I think most of these can actually stay the same. Transport type will remain the same. Generally, authentication type as well. Depending on, it really depends on your specific environment, but generally they would stay the same. Email attributes, and this is provided so that this is the attribute that's used when logging in via email, which is obviously an important factor for single sign-on. So we can leave that right now as default. I've not specified any custom attribute for that, but if you do, or if you have more than one attribute, you can add additional attributes here as well, which is great. Duo username attribute, it says check this box to specify an alternative attribute that contains a Duo username. So if it's not an email attribute, then you've got the option to further customize there. We'll leave that as the same. And then we've got the username normalization setting, and this is just giving you an option to either keep it the username normalization is simple, or not to use it at all. And this basically shows that it tells you here, in fact, it controls if your username should be altered before trying to match them with a Duo user account. So if a username comes in as an example there, domain /username, or any of these ones here, they're treated as the same user essentially. So that's performing user normalization, and that's what that is. If you change that to none, then it's going to essentially take the username, whatever's presented, as face value. So do bear that in mind. I think in most cases it will be left as simple. Expired password reset. So we have the option if we're using LDAP-S or StarTLS to allow users to reset any expired passwords. You can see here, because we're not using, or we've not specified these two fields here, one of the two fields that is, we do not have the option here to enable this. Now, last step here before we complete the Duo single sign-on is the permitted email domains. So step 2 was all about the Active Directory configuration and making sure everything matches. As I said, normally we can leave pretty much all of that as default. The last step here is to configure what we call permitted email domains, and this is essentially the section where you will validate that the domain you want to use, so in my case demo.networkwizkid.com, is indeed the domain owned by your organization. So I'm using a subdomain, so mine is slightly different, so I'm going to cheat a little bit here. So what you can see in a previous one, what I did is I actually verified a different domain name, another domain name that I have. We're actually going to do another one today as part of this demonstration. All this means really is that the usernames are going to, or the email addresses associated with the usernames when logging in will have to conform to the domain name that you own essentially. So I'm cheating a little bit here because I'm using a subdomain. So my domain is networkwizkid.com. And I've left the previous one in there just to kind of show you, you know, that once everything's completed and you've verified your domain, your status here will say or show as verified. We can see the new one that I've just added here. It's not showing as verified yet because we need to essentially copy this DNS text record value. We need to insert that as a TXT record in our DNS, and then once we've done that, and set the TTL as well, we can then click verify and then it should verify. So if I click verify now, we can see that it's unable to verify that. So we actually need to copy this and verify this now. So we'll do this quickly in the background and then we'll return to the video. So that DNS record now has been added. So if I just click verify, hopefully it can pick that up straight away. Yep, and yes it does. So we can see now that I've added that TXT record to my DNS, and I can now safely say that that is my domain because I've verified it with the DNS text record value that we was given here. So I'll just leave the old one. Don't really matter in this this case as it's a demo account. And now we've added the new one here, networkwizkid.com. And that's it. So all we need to do now is we need to run the test at the end. And we can see there that we've got a problem searching on the provided base DN. If you're using integrated authentication, please make sure the server running the authentication proxy is domain join. Check the authentication proxy logs for additional information. So let's see what the issue is here. So this particular step here attempts to contact our Active Directory server and the authentication proxy to bind that binds that service account there. So first and foremost, let's just make sure that the details here are correct. Demo.networkwizkid.com. Okay, so let's return back to our authentication proxy, and if we just close that log file and then we can reopen it. Let's see what we have here. So it's around the same time. We can see LDAP search failed. Bind must be completed on connection. Bad bind. No bind on this connection, or there's insufficient privileges to bound the user. So that looks like we need to check the service account here. Okay, that looks right. So to me, that might actually be something to do with the password. So let's just run a quick test here. And just verify that we're still getting the same, or whether we are still getting the same issue actually once we use the plain text password. Just restart that service there. Okay, so let's just go back now to the Duo admin panel, and then let's run that test again. You can see that the issue is still there, so if we pretty much know then that it shouldn't be password related in this case. So if we just open that again, let's just see if we're still getting the same issues. Yeah, so we can see that there is a binding issue still. So let's take a look into this. Let's just make sure our actual domain controller is alive and that our user has the correct privileges. Okay, so it looks like the user in this case may not have the correct privileges, so let's just modify that. So it might actually be because I've not joined this particular server to the domain. So let's just give that a quick try here. Connect this to a domain real quick. You can see at the moment it's just standalone, and domain name is kid.com. And then if we just enter some admin credentials and join that domain there, we can see that it's now asking us who will be using this PC, and it's an administrator. So let's just restart that now, and then we can try it again now that we've joined the domain. So I've now restarted the authentication proxy again, and the machine in which the authentication proxy is installed on is part of the domain now, so we should be all good. We've still got that clear password there, so we'll probably change that in a moment, but I just wanted to show you that once joined to the domain, we go back to the admin panel and run that test, and we can see that Active Directory is now configured correctly and showing as green, which is great. So what we'll do is we'll just quickly go back to this, and then if we just exit out of that, and let's just run that same command again. Let's get the notepad open again, and we'll just encrypt the password again. So let's just enter that. Okay, so let's open our authentication proxy manager again. We can see there that that is protected again. So again, we'll just run that test again just to make sure that everything's okay, and we can see there that it's configured correctly, no issues there. So we just go ahead and save that, and then once that's successfully saved, we can go back to single sign-on, and there we have it. So we can, if we wanted to, this is normally done at the first step, we can create our own subdomain. So if I just click on create a custom domain now, we can see as a paying customer, this is what you would get. If you're in a trial, you won't get the option to do this. So for me, I will create a subdomain. Network WizKid demo, I'll call it, and then we'll save and continue. So that's going to be now my custom subdomain. Let's confirm that. There we go. So now we've got a custom subdomain that is set, and you can't change that once set. So do bear that in mind and make up a name that is going to be useful for you. And this is used when, as it says there, users are connecting and authenticating to applications that are protected using single sign-on as well. But there we have it. So that's how we essentially configure Duo single sign-on with on-premise Active Directory. In our next video, we'll focus on continuing the steps to configuring the Duo network gateway.